Good morning. In 2 Corinthians chapter 9, we find these words, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest in me." I saw a Facebook post the other day that said something like this. I don't have the exact words, but it said, "You can't really be a Christian until you understand the full power of grace." I don't think any statement has ever been more true than that one. We cannot really be a Christian until we understand the full power of grace. See, people can go through life being religious all they want. They can go to church every Sunday, they can read their Bible, they can pray, they can do all the things that Christians do. In fact, I suspect that many people go through life attending church faithfully, giving financially to the church, sacrificial giving, in fact, and treating each other as Jesus would want them to treat them, but still wondering, how could God forgive them for their sin? Still always pushing God away because they just can't understand how perfect and holy God really is. I think we all struggle with that to a certain degree. I think, and for that reason I'm sharing these words today, is because I want you to really hear and really understand the power of God and the power of forgiveness and the power of grace. A few years ago, I had an older woman in the church asked to talk to me. And so I went over to her house. We sat and we drank coffee. And then she got a serious look on her face and she says, "Do you think I'm going to heaven?" It kind of surprised me because I frequently preach and teach about the grace of God and about the forgiveness of sin, the power of the cross, and the hope that we have of eternity, of going to heaven. This person had heard pastors preach the good news of Jesus Christ for probably 70 or 80 years. And yet there was this nagging doubt. Do you think I'm good enough? Do you think I'm going to heaven? Last Sunday in my sermon, I mentioned the phrase divine absurdity. And it's the divine absurdity of forgiveness, how we can forgive somebody who has offended us, somebody who has mocked us and scorned us and done some really bad stuff against us. How can we possibly forgive them? And yet Jesus tells us to forgive someone 70 times 7. Now, do you suppose God is any different than that? That God somehow holds back his forgiveness from us because we're not quite good enough, we're not going to church enough, or we're not praying enough, therefore God can't love us. That's not the way it works. In fact, God's forgiveness is completely absurd. We don't earn it. We can't earn it. It's a gift from him. So if we apply that whole concept of divine absurdity to our relationship with the holy God, in no way do I qualify for God's forgiveness. I simply don't. I know myself. God is holy and righteous, and I am not. It doesn't make sense to me, or probably to you, that God could possibly forgive me or forgive us. It's completely absurd, and yet in the midst of it, God does forgive. The old gospel hymn says, "Jesus loves even me." I love that word, even me. I kind of put a little special emphasis on that when I sing it. The second verse of that song goes like this: "Though I forget him and wander away, still he doth love me wherever I stray. Back to his dear loving arms would I flee, when I remember that Jesus loves me." You know, I'm convinced that the one thing that keeps us away from a loving and intimate relationship with God is that we have a hard time really relying upon his grace. We struggle with that. I know we do. We spend too much time stewing over the question, how could he love me with all my sin, with all my consistency, all my failures? How could he possibly love me? Surely God must detest me for the things that I do. And what that really boils down to is a denial of God's grace. That's saying that his love is not deep enough, his love is not wide enough to compensate, to encompass our sin in order to set us free. I'm thinking that right now, where you are seated, listening or watching this video, that you're saying to yourself, yep, that's me. I just can't comprehend the extent of God's love. I just can't understand how I could possibly be good enough for him to accept me. And the answer to that is, that's right. You're not good enough. I'm not good enough. None of us are good enough. And that's the power of God's grace. That's what we have to understand. His grace is sufficient. It's big enough. It's tall enough, it's wide enough to encompass our sin so that we can be forgiven. May God remind you of that every day, how much you are loved. May you have a great day ahead of you. May you rest in God's love. Amen.